Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Well, welcome everyone. This is Jerry Theo with the National Compadres Network and the Healing Generations podcast. I want to welcome you once again to our journey of dialogue and discussion, of learning, of healing, of growing, as we, attempt to bring forward, the beautiful messages and lessons and medicine that we have from our people, from our ancestors, our grandparents, all those people that have taught us along the way, including life itself. But we also are on a path of healing generations because we recognize through our journey and through everything that we've been through, there's struggles and pain, and we recognize we live in a world that has both with it. And so I want to, first of all, thank Creator and the ancestors and begin by just acknowledging all those folks in our lives that have contributed in whatever way to our lives. And as I do that, I want to acknowledge all of your ancestors, all the people in your lives that touch you and have raised you and guided you that way. And today I'm very happy to have with us, a very significant person in our community, a leader, really a wisdom keeper, someone that has really opened doors and challenged the regular way that we've done things in so many ways for the goodness of our people, for the good healing and the restoration of families and of people and of communities as well. And who I'm speaking about today is the Honorable Judge Rosie Speedlin González, and out of my daddy's hometown, our hometown over there, San Antonio. At least she's from Brownsville, though, so we'll talk about that. And has really lived a life of a lot of service, working as a social worker, child protective services investigator, worked in emergency assistance, as a gang counselor, facilitator, working in schools, a program director for adolescent programs, and probation officer. And I believe you taught in your high school as well. So many, many ways of serving and of really giving back to community. And now, an honorable judge there in Bexar County. And so I want to just welcome you and thank you for being with us today and give you an opportunity to welcome the folks that are listening.
Muchas gracias, Jerry. El placer es mío. Buenas tardes to everyone. I'm very humbled to be here, in large part because one of my first experiences during that time, I say I'm a recovering social worker, but during that time that I was working with adolescents and substance abuse, the organization I worked for, the Mexican American Unity Council, sent me to Austin for a conference, a TACADA conference, Texas Association of Chemical Dependency, algo así, ¿verdad? So to license me as an LCDC, a licensed chemical dependency counselor. And it was the very first conference that they were hosting at the brand new Austin Convention Center. And it was over 30 years ago that I got to meet you. You may not remember, Jerry, but you put on a session on El Hombre Noble and the Cuatro Acuerdos. And it hit hard and it hit home because you talked about so many things that were so culturally relevant to the lives that my cohorts, my friends had lived, that I had lived, but nobody was talking about it. No one was talking about it in professional circles, in academic circles. It was stuff that you talked about at the kitchen table. With our familias, but not in the setting that I had seen you do it in, and it just blew me away. And you spoke truth to power. And poco a poquito, picking up here and there, the journey took me to be in a position that I am now, to use the wisdom that was passed to me by people like you along my life's journey. And we're using it now in a program we call Reflejo Court for injured, hurt souls who never got to address the trauma in their lives, and we're offering them that opportunity through the criminal justice system.
Wow. Yeah, that was a while, 30 years ago. And both you and I have,
You had just a little bit of salt and pepper here
a
back then.
little
A little
bit back
bit.
then, and now I got a lot of it. And you joined me too.
Yes.
But, we've been through many things and in those 30 years. And, but I want to begin because I always acknowledge that as much as I've done in my life, it's come from learning the lessons of growing up in the family that I grew up in and the environment that I grew up in. And, the blessings and also the struggles, So I wonder if you could just, bless us with sharing a little bit about your upbringing. Where are you from? Where are your people from? And how you grew up and to get you to, to begin doing this work.
Well, I'm originally from Brownsville, Texas. I'm first generation American on my father's side. And my mother's family was in that part of South Texas for generations. My father was born and raised in Linares, Nuevo León, a small rural town outside of Monterrey. And he was born, by all accounts, either in 1927 or 1929. He had multiple documents, as was common of that generation, who was very transient. There was a very transient population that went from Mexico to the United States and back and forth, where they worked through the Bracero program and other programs. And he was one that applied for resident alien status as an adult, and he ended up working for the Mexican federal government for over 40 years as a Mexican customs agent, a federal. And although he was very traditional in some ways, he was very progressive in other ways, which is kind of the definition, if you know much about Mexico and that country and how it developed. There is a lot of tradition and culture to that country, but they're also very progressive. I mean, they had the very first black president in this part of the world, in Presidente Guerrero, back in the 1700s, 1800s, something that was not spoken about in our country. Very, very progressive in human rights, very progressive in indigenous rights. And he had that mentality, while at the same time had some very, very strong beliefs about how we should act and carry ourselves in our communities. My mother was born in 1932 and was raised in the shadow of World War II. And she was born in a small farming community known as El Calaboz. And El Calaboz sits on a road that is known in South Texas as Military Highway, because that was the road that was used to bring troops into South Texas to a Fort Brown, which was at the tip of South Texas. And that's where the Army people, the people in green uniforms, would march down Military Highway through these agricultural communities. So El Calaboz sits between El Ranchito y La Paloma, two larger agricultural communities that sit on Military Highway, and those sit between San Benito, the hometown of Freddie Fender, and Brownsville, Texas, where I was born. And she was raised in the shadow of World War II. And I say that about her because it played out in our home. My dad was, as they say, Mexicano hasta las meras cachas, right? And my mom was one that stood up for patriotism and being a good American and being a good citizen. And so, on one side, we had someone that refused to speak English and insisted and pushed for my brother and I to speak perfect Spanish. On the other side, we had a parent that said, you can't succeed in this country if you have an accent. You cannot succeed in this country if you do not master the English language. And so to her, we spoke perfect English. To him, we spoke perfect Spanish. And it played well for us. It played out very well for us. And they both had very high expectations of us. And there was never any talk other than you're going to go to college. There was never a question about it. And they had their methods of making sure that we kept our eye on that prize. And for example, through elementary school, they would pay us $1 for every A that we got on our report card. So of course we had straight A's. Junior high, $5 an A. By the time we were in high school, it was $20 an A.
Wow.
And that was their investment in making sure that we got through our schooling and were prepared to go into college and get a degree. And when that was happening, my mom was going to night school. She had been a bookkeeper for a furniture chain in South Texas, Edelstein's Better Furniture. And that business was owned by two brothers, two Jewish brothers, Reuben and Ben Edelstein, Mr. Reuben and Mr. Ben. And they pushed education to their employees, and they would let her go, leave work early, like 4:30, so that she could go to night school. And she dedicated 5 to 7 years of going to night school to get her not only bachelor's, but her master's, and graduated summa cum laude, and got her degrees in education and certifications in counseling. So she had her second career in education, the first career, 27 years, as being the bookkeeper, the lead bookkeeper for that furniture company. They would not call her an accountant because she did not have the credentials to be called an accountant. And so she ended up being a teacher and then a counselor, and retired as a campus counselor for the Brownsville Independent School District. So my dad worked out of town, so we would see him every few weekends, and I would see my mother at the end of a very long day, like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, when she was coming home from school for, my formative years, 7 years. And she ended up, I think she started school when I was in first grade. And she ended up graduating with her bachelor's and then got her master's within a year after that. She was very driven. And I think if she had been younger, she probably would have pursued a PhD. And she would say that she would not have been able to do what she did if my dad lived at home, because he would have wanted her home cooking dinner and taking care of him instead of allowing this time for her to go to night school. And she had a sister, our tia Chacha. And Chacha would provide supervision to me and my brother once we got home from extracurricular activities and everything to keep us busy while she was going to night school. And so people would challenge her, I remember, and ask her, how can you be away from your kids at night like that? And she would say, in my house, we push education. And I cannot push education on my children if I do not set the example of how education can benefit us. And the only example I can set is myself, putting myself through school and having them watch me study on the weekend. She would take us to the library with her every weekend, and having them watch me work hard for those degrees. And so there was a time and place for everything, the way she saw it. And she set a great example for my brother and I. And both of us are college graduates. And I went on to get an advanced degree. And, I think education for many of Latino families and indigenous families is the way out, right? It's the way out of the barrio. It's the way off the reservation. It's the way out of poverty. And so my mom was the only child of 4, the youngest, who was not sent into the fields to go and pick crops. She was kept in school. Her oldest brother was a World War II veteran. He fought in the South Pacific. Her second oldest brother was a Korean War veteran. And Chacha was one that kind of was left out and left behind on a lot of things. And she ended up living with us for the majority of her adult life. My mom took care of her. And she was taken out of school early, so she couldn't read. She could barely write her name, and didn't have any skills really to work in a structured environment. So my mom did the best she could to make sure that she was taken care of. My dad was the oldest of 8. Very interesting parents that we had, because they were both at one time or another alienated from their siblings and families. And so I have cousins and aunts and uncles in Mexico that I haven't seen in over 20 years because they showed up to my dad's funeral. And before that, I had never met them or seen them. And we didn't follow up with any type of contact. On my mom's side, I have cousins in their 60s and 70s in Houston, and I've got cousins in Georgia in their 60s and 70s. They're older than us, generation older than us, my brother and I. And so we've kind of that spread out, right? That diaspora of us, we spread out to the Southwest. And And I know we have family all over Mexico, but there's no contact. There's no relational type of interaction, which I think the only regret I have is that our parents didn't encourage that type of interaction more. We were very isolated, very nuclear. Back in that day, it was odd to see a Mexican-American family with only 2 kids. Most people had 3, 4 kids or more. And so very small gatherings of us during the holidays. I didn't know what a tamalado was because my mom didn't make tamales, until I was in my 20s. And so, I attended a tamalada in my mid-20s. And that's the first time I saw people make tamales. My mom would go buy them during the holidays, but I never participated in any of that. So I'll tell you a brief story. My brother was in the Marines and I had gone off to college, and we happened to be home at the same time visiting over the holiday sometime in the 80s. And Tejano music had just taken off. And my brother and I were in the kitchen, and I said, hey, man, turn that up. I think it might have been Emilio Navaira or Selena. And my mom looked at my brother and I, what are y'all listening to? Tejano, Mom, it's what's going on. And she goes, mira, válgame Dios. I raised you to fit in and be Americans. Los mandé to get your education y me regresaron más mexicanos que la chingada. And I'm like, Mom. But she was of a different generation.
Yeah.
Chicano to her was an insult. There's nothing Chicano about me, she would say. There's nothing Mexican about me. I was born in this country. I'm an American citizen. And you could hear the Star Spangled Banner playing in the back. And then on the other side of the house, we had my dad, who was second grade education, a self-proclaimed brujo and curandero, trabajos all over the house. That we knew how to manage his little trabajitos, right? And my mom and dad were good. They said, those are things that your dad believes in, and these are things that I believe in. So we went to church every Sunday, and we were raised Catholic. I consider myself now a cultural Catholic. I do not practice or attend services. And they both said to us, you can believe in your dad's beliefs, or you can believe to be Catholic, or when you are of age, you don't have to believe in either one, and you can form your own beliefs. So that's the point where I'm like, they were very progressive in many ways, very open-minded, yet they were very traditional in other ways. That is the background of what created the person I am today.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, my mom was very proud of saying, Tío Calixto was the last Pony Express rider to deliver mail in South Texas by horseback. That was one of her uncles. Her grandmother, Mama Lola, was Jewish and rode horseback naked across South Texas. These are the stories that we heard growing up, So, that's all. They're all part of a thread of the fabric of our culture and background.
Yeah. Well, it's beautiful, to hear the complexity of that, because I think that many times when people talk about Mexicanos, or talk about even Tejanos, or talk about us, as brown-skinned people, there's a certain kind of rigid, stereotypical view of who we are. And the reality is we're a complexity of many things, of many experiences. And in fact, sometimes the dichotomy of the different people that we have in our lives, your mom and your dad, who are, somehow married and raised you two, but very different in some ways, but nevertheless gave you a rooted sense that you are and could be whatever you wanted to be. And, I too remember, my parents not wanting us to speak Spanish. And for many years, I didn't understand that until I began to understand the history.
Yes.
That, for my dad says, que somos Tejanos, we're Tejanos, right? And he didn't say Mexican, he didn't say native, and even though we had both in us. And not until my tío says, well, back then, mijo, it wasn't good to say you were Mexican. It wasn't good to say you're native because you got treated different, but you could be a Texan. So and even revealing that, some of the horrors that they saw of Mexicano men being hanged and lynched and stuff like that. And, and those are things that are deep within many times our parents' spirits and minds, and they want better for us. They don't want us to suffer that way. They want us to be able to, to be able to not only survive, but to thrive in a good way.
It was a protection, I think, because of their experiences, right?
Yeah.
My mom was of the generation that they weren't allowed to speak in Spanish on the playground. And if they did, they were disciplined, they were punished.
Yeah.
And so I think that played a huge part in her wanting us to learn English so well and mastering that language. And she was just, I think, a lot like your parents, you know, they were very rigid in how they identified. And for me, se me prendió el foco on identification, hearing, because I had the honor and privilege of actually meeting and hearing Trinidad Sanchez Jr. Do a poetry reading many, many, many years ago. And of course, he picked up and read to us, Why Am I So Brown? Which is a beautiful poem to a young little girl about the color of her skin. And one of the lines in that poem is, you know, proclaims and proclaims her as being of the raza cósmica. And that's exactly what you described. We are, you know, so much a mixture, a mestizo, right, of European, of African, of indigenous. And we have a myriad, a kaleidoscope of skin shades, of dialects. And, you know, when you tell people about all these native indigenous dialects in Mexico alone that are recognized by the Mexican government, they are just gobsmacked. They're like, what? And I say, yeah. And you know, we're just north of there, we're in a country that wants to make English the official language, you know, and we forget of the people that were here before the colonization. And the trauma that colonization has imposed on generations of people. You know, colonization trauma, language trauma, food trauma, and stripping people of their identity the way that it was done, you know, by genocide. And, you know, people want to close their ears off and say, oh, get over it. That was then, this is now. But I think the truth of the matter is that we see highlights of that colonization and trauma every day. Every day we still see it, and it's just dressed different.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And as you're speaking, it's, you know, it reminded me of so many of the challenges that I had as a young person growing up, because, you know, my parents did the best they could, but some of what they experienced, you know, I experienced something different, and I had different challenges, and I didn't want to go home and tell them. I didn't want to tell them about the racism and the oppression I didn't want to tell them about the feelings that I was feeling and all those things, you know. You know, I'm wondering, as in spite of your parents giving you that foundational root, you know, what were some of those things that you struggled with, that you found difficult and challenges in your life that really challenged you to reach deeper into who you are?
You know, I'm going to tell you now, you know, at almost 59 years of age, those challenges, I was so fortunate to have the parents and the life that they gave us. Those challenges were really self-created in my own mind. And what I mean by that, for example, my first big life challenge, I think, was coming out to my mother. I didn't have to tell my dad. My dad would have conversations with me that led me to believe, and have been reaffirmed over the years, that he knew I was different. He knew that I had an affinity for women. But he never just said it out loud. He just had these conversations with me. He would make remarks about women to me, not my brother. He would give me consejos, advice, based on having a female partner, not a boyfriend. And when I came out to my mother, the anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10 was like a 10.5. It was on a Sunday morning. The barbacoa and corn tortillas with pico de gallo are out. That was a traditional Sunday morning meal. And she's drinking her café or coffee. And she's reading the local paper, the Brownsville Herald. And she's sitting on her chair. And I come in at the other end of the dining room table. And I said, Mom, I got to tell you something. And she says, well, spill it. Tell me. I can't see her. She's behind the paper. And so I said, well, I need to tell you, I'm gay. And she folded the paper. I could only see just her eyes. She folded it over and she says, well, tell me something I don't already know. And then she picked up the paper again, and she didn't skip a beat and kept reading the paper. And so I had made in my mind a much bigger deal and much more emotional. I was expecting this drama and I was going to get disowned, and none of that happened.
Wow.
Other challenges, reeling in all the freedom and privilege, looking back, that my parents made sure we had, staying out late, partying through college, not prioritizing academics, all sorts of, as my dad would say, chiflazones, right? Just acting out in ways that I used to think, slowed my advancement in life down. But in hindsight, those challenges had a purpose. If I had not been in the social work field for 11 years, I would not have been the type of lawyer that I became, helping the very people as an attorney that I had helped as a caseworker, as an investigator, as a substance abuse counselor, as a teacher, as a probation officer. And had I not had those experiences in the social work fields and as an attorney helping these people and seeing their struggles and advocating for them, I would not be the judge I am today. And there's a reason and rhyme to life. And I've learned that as I've gotten older, mostly in my 50s, reflecting on the journey and the path that has gotten me to where I am today. And my parents, were always keeping up with the Joneses, had, like, as they would say, carro del año, right? They always had a new car. My dad had several vehicles. We lived in a subdivision. They moved us out of the classic barrio, where we had a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house in the barrio with a carport, pretty much a larger house than most of the neighbors, and then moved us into an all brick home in a subdivision away from there with a whole different culture, a whole different set of neighbors. Nothing like, there weren't kids playing in the street because there was a park nearby. There weren't, people screaming that you could hear fighting, 2 houses down, because people in that neighborhood just didn't do that. There's more of a professional culture of people in that neighborhood rather than working class culture of people. And of course, with that comes a different behavioral expectation and a different expectation overall in life from you. So my parents, that's what they valued. And that's where they put us. And that's where, they died. And I hope, they're both gone now, that they're both proud of who we've become and what we've been able to contribute to those who cross our path.
Yeah. I really want to come back to where you started there, because you described your parents and their own sense of who they were. They had their own personality, their own ways, their own somewhat rigid way of looking at the world and expectations and everything. So you could conclude them to be, certain kind of people. But both of them, and I just really want to acknowledge this in them, in you sharing who you were, accepted you unconditionally. And that's huge.
Very, very
as
big.
you know, sitting on the bench and working with people that struggle, that cope in some very sometimes hurtful ways to themselves and others, you know the wound that is left behind when your own mom and dad don't accept you, don't really want you, don't know how to love you. And your parents gave you such a huge gift. Whether they did it nomás así, well, I knew already what you're telling me, played it off, whatever that was. But the welcoming and accepting of you in your totality.
And that came with them growing, Jerry, because they weren't always like that. And I talk to people about that. Memory doesn't leave me. And I know now that it's a wound that never really got reconciled or addressed. But having your mother slap your hand away and grab me by the wrist, and she says, I don't want to hold your hand. You have sweaty hands and sweaty feet, just like your father. So don't grab my hand, ever. I must have been 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And she grabbed me by the wrist to cross the street. But I carried that for a long time. And then I realized as an adult, learning what I learned and all this education that I've received over the years, life education, academic education, that my mom grew from that. And so did my father. They weren't the most affectionate people. I remember a friend, a very close friend of mine that I grew up with. We met at 12, graduated from high school together. It was a cold call. This was a few years ago. And she says, hey, I just left my parents' house. So it had to be before her dad passed away. So several years ago. And they said, I love you to me. And they wanted a hug. And I said, mm-hmm. She said, what the hell? And I said, her name is Cindy. I said, yeah, I know Cindy. I said, I remember growing up and neither of our parents were affectionate. And it was just, and we thought it was just us. That's how we were. Yeah. But then to see my parents and her parents all of a sudden grow as they got older into wanting to show us that they loved us and that they cared about us, that they missed us, and wanting a hug as we were leaving back to our worlds and telling us they loved us, and not to take so long to come back, and to please call them and let them know how we're doing. Because we both had habits, and I'm sure the other women that I grew up with, se nos pasaban weeks sometimes, of not calling home. And, if there's people out there now listening, call your parents, man. Call them home at least once a week. Let them know you're okay, so that pa que no se preocupen, and they know that you're doing all right.
But and I think, as you mentioned, we have a choice, and you had a choice and have a choice, as many people do. You could hold on to that 8-year-old little girl experience, or you could open up and recognize that your mom and dad were people that had their own wounds, that had their own issues. And sometimes your own wounds and your own issues make you react a certain way, make you respond a certain way. And you could continue to hold on to that, or you can create space in which your parents can grow along with you till you get to a point with tremendous anxiety of wanting to reveal to them who you really are and recognize they love you in your totality. But it's your choice what you hold on to and what you water.
Right.
And I think, that experience of you being willing to grow with them and allow them to grow, but also to forgive and to let go is, part of the basis of what I think makes you so successful as a judge.
Well, that came from watching a mother deal with a father who was away a lot, who in hindsight we know was a cad, was a binge drinker, was a womanizer. And watching her stay up till all hours of the night waiting for him to come home borracho, and then to be verbally abusive. He never laid a hand on her or us. Neither parent used corporal punishment with my brother and me, which is also very non-traditional. And to watch her over the years grow, and she had to do a lot of deep soul searching to become the counselor and to become the therapist. And she would use my brother and I as her practice subjects, and we would sit there and take standardized tests and the little what is it, the Rocher test and
Rorschach,
and all sorts of assessments, and so we grew with her. She was growing, but we were also learning from her on the power of healing, the power of listening. And, she had great friends. We had a friend of hers, El Padre Juan Nicolau, from South Texas, a Spanish priest who would always remind us, tienen dos ojos y dos orejas, because you're supposed to listen and watch twice as much as your one boca, as your one mouth. And so watch and listen twice as much as you speak was his parable to us. So she surrounded us with a lot of great role models and with a lot of the necessary structure, and also with the latitude to be ourselves, to live our authentic lives, to be honest with people. we saw a father that tried to lead a life with a lot of dishonesty. And that was something that I found repulsive in my adult life. I didn't want to deal with people that were not going to be upfront and transparent with me. And if that's how you navigated your life, then I would separate myself from you. Because, a lie here and a lie there were, for lack of better words, very triggering to me. Yes. If you told me you were going to come by at 5:00 on a Saturday and you never showed up, oh my God. For in my 20s, I can't even start to describe the feelings that will well up in me, and other, small little lies here and there. And so I think in a way it was a challenge for me to deal with that, but at the same time, it developed the way in which I picked my friends, and I navigated my own way in this community, and it has served me well. And I have some tremendous, amazing, authentic people in my life that add to the quality of life that I live now.
As you're speaking, I can see how all of those experiences, add to the insight and the consciousness and the compassion you have in the work you do today. One of the things that was really interesting for me is I would see men that they got referred to me that looked and acted like my dad, right? Or like my tios. And oh my gosh, and talk about triggering. So I had to learn to work through that, but also through these men that were telling me their stories, finally telling me their deeper stories of el porqué, why, and them to cry in front of me that they've never cried in front of anybody, and then to be remorseful and they never said that to anybody, begin to understand that I wonder if my dad felt like that too, or what he went through in order to take him to that place where he was bien brusco and hard and loud talking and all of those things, So I know that's all contributed to the beautiful work that you do and the consciousness that, I wonder if you could share with us a little bit about the work that you're doing, especially about the Reflejo Cord and, that really amazing work that you're doing and that is so groundbreaking in one sense, but is so healing for so many people in a grander sense.
So I'll start out with the best news. I haven't shared it with you yet, Jerry, but just last Friday, we were given the news that the Texas Association of Specialty Courts has selected Reflejo Court as their court of the year.
Wow.
And
congratulations.
Yes, so we're very proud of that. We're going to go up to Fort Worth in the first week of March, I think, and we're going to take as many team members as we can to go accept that award from the Texas Association of Specialty Courts. I'll tell you that I don't think this court would have been possible but for the fact that I was graced with the privilege to meet my spouse. And that's Dr. Stacy Speedlin González. And you may have met her when you visited us.
Yes.
And she brings with her own journey of abandonment issues, of substance abuse issues, of psychiatric issues, and overcoming some tremendous challenges to end up being the woman who she is today, which is a published, multi-time published expert on trauma and addiction, having earned her PhD in counseling. She left academia and now owns her own counseling clinic. And so she and I met at a conference that she invited me to, along with others. And we started dating, and I had, at the time I met her, made up my mind. I had run for office in 2010 in Bexar County, and then I ran in 2014. And both times there were, I'm a Democrat, but there were Republican sweeps. Not a single Democrat that ran in an opposed race won in either one of those cycles. And so I had kind of just said, you know what, it's just not going to happen. And I had been dating her for just about a year when I got a call in the fall from our party chair at the time, Manuel Medina, and one of his associates, Gloria Uribe. And they called me around 8:00 at night, and they said, we're calling you to ask you why you haven't filed to be on the ballot in 2018. And I said, I'm done. I thought I made it clear I'm not running again. It's a racket. And I gave them my list of grievances about why I wasn't running. And they said, please, We need you. You're the last spoke in this wheel that we're trying to put together to represent our Democratic Party in this county. Consider it. We cannot have diversity on our ticket without you on the ticket. And so Stacy had been listening to that conversation as I said no. And then I buckled and I said, okay, I'll call you in the morning. And she said, what was that about? Are they asking you to run? And I said, yes. And I told them no. And she said, well, I heard you. And she said, why not? And I said, because they shake you down for money. And if you don't pay certain people this for that, they make your life very, very difficult. And they make your campaign very difficult. And I'm done. And she said, look, she comes from a Republican family, but is a Democrat. And her mother, my suegra, is a retired, not only district court judge, state judge, but a retired justice on the Fourth Court of Appeals. And so Stacy grew up running campaigns with her mother. So she was very, very well acclimated to that culture. And she said, well, what would make it easier for you to make a decision to run? And I said, I want to run the campaign my way. I don't want any signs. Signs don't vote. They litter. I don't want any block walkers. They don't have good information on their candidates. And I expose them to all sorts of liabilities, dog bites, guns in their faces. I want to do this strictly on social media and personal appearances. She said, okay, what is it going to take to get you on the ballot? I said, I need $2,500 as a filing fee, and I need to collect hundreds of signatures in the next 30 days. And she says, we can do it. To call them tomorrow and say, we're in. I said, are you serious? She goes, if you put in $1,250, I put in $1,250. I said, okay, let's do it. So we did it. And not only did we win, I ended up beating the person that beat me in 2014 for this same bench. She beat me by about 500 votes. I ended up beating her after her one term by over 70,000 votes.
Wow.
And I did it again in 2022. Not her, but another opponent. And so 2 opponents in 22. I had a primary and a general. And so we've done it together. And so when I took the bench, I didn't just run because I thought I was entitled to be a judge. Our area, our county was in a crisis mode when it came to domestic violence. We had, and we still have, some of the highest numbers for those types of cases at both the misdemeanor and felony level in the whole state of Texas. I'm sitting right now in my chambers, which is in the courthouse, which sits in a zip code that has the highest number of intimate partner violence homicides in the state of Texas for women. And so I wanted to come and be able to say, I think I can do this job better. I have not a solution, but a path that can bring these numbers down. And with Stacy's help, we were able to identify some key elements that we needed to have in a program. Once I won my race, Judge Al Alonso approached me. He was the very first judge in our jurisdiction to start a specialty court for misdemeanor offenses. And he called me and he says, you need a specialty court. And I said, I've been thinking about it, Al. And he says, let's do it for violent offenders. And I said, okay. He goes, it's not going to be easy. I said, I know, but you didn't have any money either, Al. He goes, we can do it. Let's see what we can do. So we structured a program based on the 10 key components and best practices of what was then the National Association of Drug Court Professionals, NADCP. They're the governing body for these courts across the country. And we duplicated the structure. We duplicated how the program was to be worked by the defendants. The only difference was we were dealing with violent offenders. So we got this up and running with one participant, and that's how Al started, with one participant, and that grew. And I met with every single council person, elected council person at the municipal city level individually, and I met with every commissioner at the county level individually. 4 commissioners, 1 county judge, and then about 8 or 9 council people and the mayor, to tell them about this great idea and try to sell it to them. And I had one person on the county level, the county judge, tell me, Rosa, that's a great idea, but nobody wants to help a violent offender. And then on the city municipal side, I had a councilman tell me, Rosa, that's a great idea, but my constituents won't support something like that. And so we had that kind of attitude toward it. And so Al says to me, let's write a House bill. Let's go around all the local stuff and let's get you up and running through a House bill. So Stacy and I wrote a House bill, and we got then State Rep Roland Gutierrez to sponsor it in the House chamber, and then Senator Jose Menendez to sponsor it in the Senate chamber. And lo and behold, the bill is voted out of both chambers unanimously and gets to the governor's desk, and he signs it into law.
Wow.
And we get the law sent to our jurisdiction, and everybody's looking like, where did this come from? And how come we weren't told about it? Oh, but you were told about it. You just didn't want to help launch it. So we had to go, and no to me and Stacy means find another way. It doesn't mean, we're shut down. It just means we got to find another way to do this. And that came through the legislative process. And that was House Bill 3529 out of the 2019 legislative session, and as a pilot program that focused on first-time offenders of family violence with a history of substance abuse. The pilot program was re-upped in 2023 through House Bill 4333. And so we're still running, and we've had 28 graduates, with 27 of them not coming back into the criminal justice system, not reoffending. We have one who just recently reoffended. On the very day he graduated, he drank and then went and laid hands on his wife again. And 7 tours of military service in the Middle East. And as you can imagine, all the triggers that come with that. And the first-time offender criteria is science-driven. The science and data that Stacy and I reviewed indicates that at that juncture in the person's life, they're the most vulnerable.
Yes.
They don't want anybody to know they got arrested for laying hands on the people they love the most. They don't want their employer to know. They don't want the family to know. They will do anything to make it go away. So we make this offer to them.
Yeah.
You work this 5-phase program. It's not easy. You're going to have to address your trauma. You're going to have to get sober and maintain sobriety. We'll help you get housing. We'll help you get a job. And we've had some, I think, exceptional success with our graduates. What we learned was that, when a child is 6, 7, 8, or 9, and they're violated in a way that's neglectful or abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, what is a child to do at that age? They are completely dependent on their abuser. They don't have a bank account they can go and drain to get their own apartment. They don't have a vehicle that they can drive to get away from the abuser. They have nowhere to go, no one to help them, because the people that are supposed to help them are their parents, and those are their tios or tias, and their older siblings, and those are the people who are abusing them. And so they grow into adolescence with this anger, with this depression, with anxiety, with all sorts of emotional baggage that is rooted in that trauma. And they start to self-modulate. They start with their brother's marijuana in the drawer, and then they go to their cousin's alcohol at the family functions. And before you know it, they're going 2 houses down to the neighbor and scoring their cocaine. And it becomes a problem. And they're using that to make themselves feel better so that they don't feel anxious anymore. They don't feel angry. And before you know it, they're triggered, and that trauma's ugly head rears up again, and they're laying hands on people, and they end up in our court. And so we get them sober. We require them to address their trauma in a therapeutic, trauma-certified environment by a qualified therapist. And we get them employed, and we get them housed. And we set them up to succeed upon graduation. And I think so far the formula is working for most of our graduates.
Wow. That's amazing. And I just want to acknowledge you and your compañera for the really trailblazing work, because I'm sure this wasn't easy.
It's not easy today. We have to fight for funding because as that councilman said back then, nobody wants to help a violent offender. The majority of even advocates in the field will confess and say, lock them up and throw away the key. You can't change that person. And some of them you can't. I think the key is getting them early on in their journey with the criminal justice system, because kind of like the sicario will say to you, the first one was hard. It was so hard. I couldn't sleep for weeks. I killed that person. But the second one got easier. And by the third one, me valió, right? I can kill them with my eyes closed. I think the dynamic exists for family violence. The first time it happens, oh my God, the person is suicidal. I can't believe I did that to my husband or to my wife in front of my kids, at the family function. And then by the second time, the blow is a little easier. And by the third time, it's just the way I am. Deal with it. That's how I get when I get drunk. Make sure the kids aren't here. And if you don't want to deal with it, you can leave. I mean, that's their attitude. That's another reason why it's so important that we get them early on in this very painful journey of theirs.
And I think that that sense of knowledge of the sequencing and when you catch somebody in their trauma is really important, right? And I think that what a lot of people don't realize in this system and even across systems is that if you don't intervene then the cost to children and families and even economically to our system is going to be horrendous. And so this is not only, therapeutically important, but it's economically.
Yeah, all the data shows that one family violence offender, if they don't receive intervention, can create anywhere between 12 to 15 victims in their lifetime.
Yes.
And that's generational going forward, right? And it's a lot cheaper for them to go through a program like ours, Reflejo Court, as opposed to incarcerating them at the cost of the taxpayer. So our goal is really to make this individual, move them from being a tax burden to making them a taxpayer.
Right. And I think, from an interpersonal standpoint, what you're doing is you're saving generations of trauma, because you're now seeing a father, if you will, or mother, whoever the person is, their children are seeing them heal, and their children are seeing them, reestablish themselves, and they have an opportunity in the same way our parents had, of really now making amends and stopping a generation of further trauma that goes on. And really, that's the goal. How do we heal generations of trauma and then make it so that the next generation realizes that that's not the way to deal with your pain, And so I just really want to congratulate you and all of your staff and all the people that, have fought and continue to fight, because as you say, it's an uphill battle. And I know this because I work in it, now, and we're doing work in relationship violence and restorative practices and all these ways. And it's still an uphill battle. And, because people are still caught in that dichotomy of, who is the perpetrator and who is the negative person, and doesn't realize that trauma crosses all boundaries right that way. And so really want to acknowledge you and, the listeners that are listening out here, you all have that ability to really recognize even the trauma in your own lives, even the victimization in your own lives. And one of the things that we know is trauma that's not transformed gets transferred. So we have to make a decision on what to do.
Well, and I'll graciously accept your compliments, but I cannot do that without taking aside the people that planted the seeds on this journey. And you were one of them, Dr. Dale. You've planted that seed of, we need to do things different. We need to acknowledge, in your case, the men in our culture are going through a lot of pain. And we need to be there to help them overcome that if we want to have future generations of hope, that there is healing, that there is love, that there is an opportunity for them to live their authentic selves. And not always have to live up to the expectations of their fathers, or their mothers. And maybe expectations isn't a good word to use, but maybe to surpass those expectations and break those chains of you need to be in this box, mijo, right? And those men coming out of that and saying, there's more to me than what I can pack in that box.
Right. And thank you for that, and I appreciate that. And, I was just recently in a conversation with some people that are doing work nationally, and they were talking about that box that men are in and that men, don't cry and men don't share feelings. And I'm saying, well, let me stop you right there. Because I've worked, almost 50 years now. And if you bring me some men in a circle and they feel comfortable and they feel honored and they feel safe, they will talk and they will cry. It's just that we have not created spaces and processes in order to get those little boys out of that box, in order that they can really share the generational pain that some of them carry. And then what they need programs like yours, and like the ones that we run at the National Compadres Network, in order to teach them how to be better, how to deal with their pain in a better way, in order that they're not hurting other people, And it's an ongoing journey, and so with that, I want to just kind of, as we complete this circle today, I also recognize over the years you've learned many lessons and learned through many challenges. And you now, I consider you an elder. I consider you, a wisdom keeper. I consider you one of the leaders in our communities, So I want to ask you if you could offer some consejos, some advice, some wisdom to that next generation, in order to promote the healing and the well-being of our families and deal with the trauma that sometimes sits in our very living rooms and our lives and our relationships. What kind of advice or consejos would you give?
I think we have to start with acknowledging that people have certain definitions and expectations of us, and including our parents. And to be honest and open about those expectations with the people we live with that are raising us, to allay their fears that if we go off the beaten path, we're still going to be okay. And that if they accept us for who we are, as opposed to withholding love, waiting for us to become who they want us to become, who we may never become, that's important for the next generation to hold on to. And because what I've seen and what Stacy has seen through her practice and her journey is that the most damaged people, the most hurt people are those, of course, who were hurt. And it could have been just the slapping away of the hand with me, right? I'm not going to hold your hand. Or it could have been that dress doesn't look right on you, or it just a slight of any level for a child has enormous ramifications for them in the moment and over time. And recognizing that our parents are people too, but also having the fortitude and the sabiduría to embrace that as part of who we are, but also grow outside of that and be brave and courageous. And I know it's not easy. It's not easy to be brave and courageous against all odds and in light of adversity and challenges. But if you're brave and courageous now, the reward of living your life authentically in a way that you hurt the least amount of people possible, and always put yourself, your mental health and your physical health first, because if you can't love yourself, you can't love anybody else. And so we kind of have to do away with that, with our mother's way of raising us, which is sacrifice, right? They sacrificed everything for us. Mom, you shouldn't have sacrificed for us. You should have made sure you had what you needed first. And then, like my mom did, right? She went after her education and set an example for us. But you need to make yourself a priority, not in a very selfish way, but in a healthy way. And make sure that you live an authentic, transparent, honest life, because that will pay off in spades as you get into your 30s and 40s and 50s. And that will come a lot sooner than you think. And it comes, as my mom would often remind me, in the blink of an eye. One day you're 25, partying it up, and the next day you're 55, y te duelen los huesos. And, you haven't drank alcohol in 5 years, and you've got to deal with diabetes and the carpal tunnel and everything that comes with aging. But life is made easier when you love yourself, you have a great team around you, your home life is great, your dogs are happy to see you, and I could not ask for, with all its challenges and all its color in it, a better life growing up, a better life now, and the journey that I've been in ya casi 59 años of my life. And I feel very blessed to have people like John Vaca in my life. Who I will never forget the day he walked into my chambers right here with this curriculum, MP360, and he uttered your name. And I'm like, say that name again, because I haven't heard that name in 30 years. But when I did meet him, that's exactly what we need for our program. And so it's been very, very cyclical in closing circles and opening circles with this program. And it's been a huge blessing, I think, for me to be able to give to this community so much. Because this community, San Antonio, like Grisela Alonso likes to say, it's the New York City of South Texas, And when you were in the Valley and you went to San Antonio, it was like going to New York City, and you came back with all sorts of stories and adventures. And I left the Valley, and I settled here in San Antonio. And it has blessed me with a beautiful life, and it's embraced me. And I want to give back to this community as much as it's given me in the way of acceptance and love. So the journey continues, Jerry.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And, and my mom would say que todo se paga. And I think, in the way that you're receiving these blessings is because you've given so much and you continue to give. And the journey's not over. We still got a lot more work to do.
Yes.
And so I look forward to me coming to San Antonio and us sitting down and figuring out how we can do more, for more people. And I really just want to thank you for your leadership, for your spirit, for your honesty. And we recognize, my little grandson, when I go play with him, he's 2.5, and he says, "Tata, let's go outside and play together. We're gonna play together," right? and he wants to do everything together, right? And that's the way that things get done, together.
Yes.
We do it together, and we figure out together. You have a piece of it, I have a piece, your compañera, other people in the community. When we do it together, we can find that healing, we can find the blessing, and then we can find really solutions in a really collective, beautiful way.
Absolutely.
So thank you very, very much. I want to, just invite the listeners to look up the Reflejo Court and Jazz González as well, and all the wonderful work that she's doing, and all the other people there in San Antonio are doing as well. And, and reach into your own hearts, and with whatever lessons you learned today, do you need to call your mom or call your dad, or maybe look for a way to help them to a sense of forgiveness and bring out the blessings that way, to acknowledge the importance of accepting each other, where we're at, but also accepting the wounds that we have so that we can work on those together, together that way.
I'm going to make a bumper sticker, together.
Yeah, together, that's right. But in the end, life can be a blessing, depending on what you water, depending on what you feed. And we want to water those things that are helpful and healing and make us whole and allow us to be just a little bit better, as we move on. So thank you all for listening, and, and pass this, this podcast on to other people. And, if you have any other suggestions or questions for Judge González, let us know, and we'll pass them on to her as well. But again, thank you very, very much for your time, and may you have many blessings. Muchas gracias. Él es Dios.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.